The evening Warren decided to end our marriage, he did it the way he read the weather report. Calm, flat, almost bored. We were sitting at this table in the front room of the Ashford house. The lamp was on. A pot of tea sat between us, going cold. I had made it out of habit the way I had made tea in that room for most of my life. "Hadley," he said, "I want a divorce." I set my cup down slowly. The room did not spin, but something in me went very still the way a pond goes still right before the wind touches it. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. 41 years is a long time. You get used to a man's voice. You learn its weather. And this was a tone I had never heard from him before. Not angry, not sad, just certain. "You want a divorce?" I repeated. "I do." And then he said the part that truly stopped my breath. "And I'm taking everything." The words landed between us like a dropped plate. Not loud, just final. I looked at the man across the table. Warren Merrick, 69 years old, sitting straighter than I had seen him sit in years. His hair had gone the color of old ash. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow from a fall on an icy porch step long ago, back when he still climbed ladders. I had cleaned that cut myself. I had held a cloth to his head while he complained the whole time. Now he was looking at me like a man reading the terms of a contract he had already won. "The house," he went on. "The accounts, all of it. My lawyer says it's clean and simple." I did not answer right away. Outside, the wind pushed against the old maple in the side yard. The branches scraped the gutter, the same sound I had heard in that house since I was a girl. Let me tell you a little about the two of us, so you understand what was actually happening in that room. Warren spent his whole working life selling buildings, commercial real estate, office parks, warehouses, strip malls. He was good at it. He knew how to walk into a room and make people trust him inside of a minute. He knew how to smile at the right time. He knew how to make a bad deal sound like a favor. For 40 years, half this town thought of Warren as the reasonable one, the steady one, the man you could shake hands with. I was the quiet one, the wife who brought the food and refilled the glasses. I spent my own career as a paralegal. Not the flashy kind. I worked in estates and wills, trusts, deeds, probate, boxes of paper that most people never want to think about until the day they suddenly have to. I read the fine print for a living. I read the lines other people skipped. Warren never once thought that mattered. That was his first mistake, though he did not know it yet. "You've thought about this," I said. "For months." The words slid under my ribs like a thin blade. Months. While I was clearing the gutters, he now claimed. While I was fixing the latch on the pantry door. While I was living our life, he had been sitting somewhere with a lawyer deciding which parts of me to keep and which to throw away. "And you believe the house is yours?" I said. He leaned back. The confidence came off him like heat off a stove. "Hadley, we've lived here 41 years. I paid into everything. Every roof, every furnace, every tax bill. Don't make this hard. It'll only cost you." I studied his face, the thin line of his mouth, the way his hands rested flat on the table, easy and sure. He truly believed it. That was the strange part. He was not lying to me. He was telling me the version of the story he had told himself, and he had told it so many times that it had become true in his own head. Then I noticed the folder beside his elbow. Legal paper. Neat tabs. Printed, not handwritten. He had not come to talk. He had come to deliver a verdict. "You've already filed," I said. He smiled. Not the warm smile from years ago. Something thinner, something practiced. Of course. There was a little bit of theater in the way he said it, as if he had walked through this moment in his mind a dozen times before he sat down, as if he had a lawyer's script folded up somewhere behind his eyes. "You should read the papers," he said. He slid the folder an inch toward me. "It'll help you understand how this goes." I did not touch it. Instead, I looked past him at the room, the crooked bookshelf he had built one weekend and never leveled, the worn arm of the reading chair by the window, the narrow shelf near the kitchen door where I kept my mother's recipe cards in a tin box. Every corner of that house held a piece of us. Birthdays, arguments over bills. One long night when we were young, sitting on the floor laughing at a table we could not figure out how to build. 41 years. And now he spoke as if I were a guest who had stayed too long. "You should start thinking about where you'll go," he added, gentle as a knife wrapped in cotton. "Your sister has room, or one of those nice apartments near the pharmacy. You'll manage." The kitchen felt very small then. The cabinets I had painted myself, the brass handles I had installed while he sat on the porch and offered advice he called supervision. "You've really planned this out," I said. "I have." And you're certain about the house? Yes? There it was again. That comfortable certainty. The kind that comes from a man who has never once been made to check his own work. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment. It was not shock. Not really. It was something colder and quieter than shock. Because the truth is, I had already seen the edges of this coming weeks before Warren ever opened his mouth. Let me back up. About 3 weeks earlier, I had come home from the market and found a man in a gray car parked across from the house. He was not doing anything, just sitting, looking at the property, then writing something down. When I pulled into the drive, he started his engine and left. I told myself it was nothing. Then a few days after that, I got a call from a woman at a title company. She was polite and a little confused. She said there had been an inquiry about the Ashford property. Someone wanted to know what could be borrowed against it. She was calling, she said, because my name was flagged on the file, and the arrangement was, in her words, unusual. I thanked her. I told her to leave the file exactly as it was. And I hung up, and I sat down at the kitchen table, and I understood something that took my breath for a second, and then handed it right back. Warren was already reaching for the house. He just did not understand yet what the house actually was. So no, when he sat across from me that evening and told me he was taking everything, I did not fall apart. I had spent 3 weeks quietly getting ready. I had made 2 phone calls he knew nothing about. I had pulled a thin leather folder out of a drawer and read it again front to back the way I used to read files at work. Slowly, carefully, line by line. But Warren did not know any of that, so I let him keep talking. "Aren't you going to say anything?" he asked. I picked up my cold tea. I took a small sip. It was bitter the way it gets when it sits too long. "There's someone else," I said. It was not a question. His jaw tightened just for a beat. Then he nodded. Yes. I had known it, of course. A man does not rehearse a speech like that for a marriage he simply grew tired of. But hearing him say it out loud was still a small stone dropped into a deep well. "Who?" I asked. He looked away. And for the first time all evening, some of that easy confidence flickered. "That's not your concern anymore," he said. 41 years, I said. "I think it's a little bit my concern. It's over, Hadley. That part of my life is over." His voice changed then. It got quieter, almost pleading, though he would never have called it that. "I've changed. I'm not the man I was. I spent a long time being someone I thought I had to be. I'm done doing that." I sat with those words, I'll be honest. In that moment, I did not fully understand them. I thought he was giving me the usual speech. The one men his age sometimes give when they leave. I thought there was a younger woman somewhere. Someone who made him feel important again. I pictured her without ever having seen her. Someone in her 40s, maybe. Someone impressed by a confident man in a good coat. I was wrong about the shape of it, but I would not learn how wrong until later. For now I just looked at my husband, this stranger wearing a face I had loved, and I felt the last thread of something quietly snap. "You've thought about all of this," I said. "The house, the accounts, where I'll live, who gets what." "I have, I told you, months. You've been very thorough." "I try to be." I almost laughed. Warren Thorough. The man who signed papers the way most people sign a birthday card. Quick and without reading past the first line. I had watched him do it for 4 decades. He would flip to the last page, sign his name with a flourish, and hand it back before the ink was dry. He thought reading the details was beneath him. He thought details were for clerks. I had been a clerk, and I had a very long memory for paper. "Warren," I said, "I want you to hear me clearly. I'm not going to fight you across this table tonight." He relaxed. He actually relaxed, the fool. "Good," he said. "That's smart. Get a lawyer if you want, everyone does. But Grant says the fastest way through is to just agree. The house has to be sold or turned over. The rest we split. You'll be fine. Better than fine, honestly. I'm being generous." "Generous," I said. "Yes." I set my cup down, and for the first time since he walked into that room, I smiled. It was a small smile. Not cruel, not even angry. But it was not the smile of a woman who was about to fall apart, and Warren noticed. His fingers stopped moving on the folder. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked. "Nothing," I said. "You should get some rest. You've got a lot of packing ahead of you." His eyes narrowed. For a second I thought he might push. Ask me why I was so calm. Ask me what I knew. But Warren had spent 41 years believing he understood me completely. He believed I was frightened and tired and about to give in because that was the version of me that was easiest for him to carry out the door. So he chose to believe it. He stood. He picked up his folder. He tucked it under his arm the way a man tucks away a winning ticket. "Think about where you'll go," he said. "I'd hate for this to get ugly." Then he walked down the hall and I heard the bedroom door close. The house went quiet. I sat there for a long time. The tea went fully cold. The wind kept working at the maple. I looked at the room around me, the room where I had grown up, the room my father had grown up in before me. The floors were the same floors my grandfather walked. The house was not just a house. It was the last thread of a family that ended with me because Warren and I never had children, and there was no one after us to hand it to. Maybe that is why I had protected it the way I did all those years ago. Maybe some part of me always knew that a house like this, a family like mine, needed someone paying attention to the paperwork. Because paper is quiet. Paper does not argue. Paper just sits in a drawer and waits patient as stone for the day someone tries to take what it protects. I stood up. I walked to the low cabinet beside the refrigerator. I opened the bottom drawer and took out the thin leather folder. The pages inside had gone a little yellow at the edges, but the ink was still clear. My name was on them. My father's name. And a word Warren had never bothered to learn the meaning of, even though he had lived his whole life on the wrong side of it. I ran my thumb along the edge of the pages, and I let myself take one slow breath. Because Warren was right about one thing. Sooner or later, a court was going to decide who this house belonged to. And when that day came, my husband was going to learn something that would take the color right out of his face. He had spent months getting ready to take everything. He had no idea what he was actually walking into. My friends, before we go on, let me ask you something the way I always do. If the person you gave 40 years of your life to sat across from you and said they were taking it all, what would you do first? Would you cry? Would you shout? Or would you go very quiet and start to think? Tell me in the comments. And if a story like this keeps you company, go ahead and follow along so we can keep sharing them together. Now, let me tell you what happened the next morning. Warren came into the kitchen wearing the navy sweater he liked to wear when he wanted to look like a decent man. It was the sweater he wore to funerals and bank meetings. He poured himself coffee. He did not look at me. He opened the newspaper as if the past 12 hours had never happened. 41 years of marriage and I had become furniture overnight. "Morning," I said. He grunted. His eyes stayed on the paper. There was an article about rising property values in the county, and he tapped it with one finger, pleased as if the whole world had been arranged for his benefit. "Good time to sell," he said mostly to himself. I buttered a piece of toast. I watched him over the rim of my cup. "What time is your lawyer expecting you?" I asked. He looked up a little sharp. "Who said I'm seeing him today?" "You did. Last night. You said Grant already had the papers drawn up." He stared at me for a moment, trying to decide whether I had guessed or listened. Then he shrugged. "This afternoon. We're going over next steps." Of course they were. Men like Warren never leave things to chance. They plan every move and then they are shocked. Absolutely shocked when the board turns out to have more squares than they counted. He folded the paper and stood. "Oh," he said, casual as anything. "Someone's coming by later to look at the place." I set down my toast. "Look at the place." "An agent, just a walkthrough. Grant wants an updated value for the split." He said it lightly, the way you might mention picking up milk. I nodded slowly. "What time?" 3. "Good," I said. "I'll be here." Something flickered across his face. Not worry, not yet. Just the smallest crack of doubt. He had expected tears at breakfast. He had expected a woman shrinking toward the door. Instead, I was calm, and calm was not part of his plan. "You don't need to be here for it," he said. "I live here," I said. The silence stretched. He cleared his throat, grabbed his coat, and left. I heard his car back out of the drive and fade down the road. And then the house was mine again, quiet and full of morning light. I finished my toast. I washed my cup. And then I went to the phone. The old landline my father had installed, the one Warren always laughed at. And I made a call. A calm voice answered on the second ring. "Ruth Callahan." "Ruth," I said. "It's Hadley Merrick. I think it's time we sat down." There was a small pause. The pause of a careful person reaching for a pen. "I read what you sent me," she said. "Can you come in this afternoon?" "After 3?" I said. "There's an agent coming to walk through the house first. I'd like to be here for that." I could hear the faint smile in her voice. "Your husband sounds very sure of himself." I looked out the kitchen window at the old maple, its branches moving in the wind. The same tree that had stood there when I was a child, long before Warren Merrick ever knew my name. "He is," I said. "Well," Ruth said. Being sure and being right are not always the same thing. I smiled. No, I said softly. They are not. To understand what Warren was walking into, you have to understand the house. I was born in it. So was my father. His name was Walter Ashford, and he was a careful man in a way that most people found dull, and I always found comforting. He kept his receipts in labeled boxes. He read every contract twice. He used to say that a house is not the walls. A house is the paper that says who the walls belong to. I did not understand that when I was young. I understood it later. I understood it completely. My father built his small fortune slowly. Nothing dramatic. A hardware business, a few pieces of land, patience. But he had watched his own father lose a family farm to a bad loan and a worse handshake, and that loss lived in him his whole life. So when it came time to think about what would happen to the Ashford house after he was gone, my father did not simply write a will and hope for the best. He put the house into a trust, not the loose kind that a person can undo on a bad afternoon. He set up what the lawyers call an irrevocable family trust. Once the house went in, it could not be casually pulled back out. My father was the one who created it. I was named the person it was meant to protect. And after he passed, I became the one who managed it. The trustee. Here is the part that matters, the part Warren never once thought about in 41 years. The house was never mine to give away. It did not belong to me the way a car belongs to you, or a coat, or a wedding ring. It belonged to the trust. I lived in it. I cared for it. I paid its bills and fixed its roof. But on paper, in the eyes of the law, the Ashford house sat inside a structure my father built to keep it safe from exactly the kind of storm that was now walking down my hallway in a navy sweater. And because it had always lived inside that trust, something else was true. Something Warren would have understood if he had ever slowed down to read. The house had grown in value over the years. A great deal. But that growth did not belong to me and Warren together. It belonged to the trust, too. The walls, the land, and every dollar the property gained while we lived in it. All of it sat behind the same locked door. Warren thought he had spent 41 years building equity in a marriage. What he had actually done was live rent-free and grateful inside a house that was never his and was never going to be. He did not know that. Or rather, he knew the house was in my father's trust. He had signed his name near that fact more than once. He just never believed it meant anything. He was a real estate man. He thought he understood property better than a quiet wife who used to file papers for a living. He thought the trust was an old formality, a dusty piece of small-town caution. He thought that when the time came, 41 years of marriage and a stack of paid bills would simply wash it all away. He was wrong, and this beautiful, terrible thing was that no one was going to correct him. Not yet. Because sometimes the best thing you can do is let a confident man walk in the wrong direction all the way to the edge at his own comfortable pace. At 3 o'clock, a silver car rolled into the drive. I watched it from the front window standing beside my father's crooked bookshelf. A woman got out. Early 40s, tidy coat, the brisk walk of someone who spends her days telling people what their homes are worth. The agent. Warren had wasted no time. I opened the door before she could knock. "Good afternoon," I said. She blinked a little, surprised. "Oh, hello, I'm Paige Sullivan. I'm here to meet Mr. Merrick." "Of course," I said. "Please come in." She stepped inside, and her eyes did the thing that agents do. Up to the ceilings, along the walls, across the floors. Measuring without a tape. "This is a lovely old home," she said. "It is," I said. "It's been in my family a long time." Warren arrived 10 minutes later, all warmth and handshakes. "Ms. Sullivan, perfect. Thank you for coming." He swept an arm toward the room like a man showing off a museum he had just inherited. "As you can see, well-kept large lot, good street." I noticed he never once said our home. He said the property, the asset, the place. Paige pulled out a small tablet and started to make notes. Warren led her through the house like a tour guide, filling every silence with numbers. "The kitchen was redone about 15 years ago," he said. I almost laughed at that. The kitchen was redone by me on my knees with a paintbrush while he watched from the porch and offered opinions I did not ask for. We moved through the rooms. Warren talked. I stayed quiet. Sometimes silence tells you more than any argument. Then Paige stopped near the window and looked at her tablet a little longer than before. A small line appeared between her brows. "I'm just pulling this county record," she said, polite and careful. "The title here, it shows the property held in a trust, the Ashford Family Trust." For half a second, the room went still. Warren waved his hand, easy and dismissive. "An old family thing. Her father set it up years ago. We'll get it sorted in the divorce. It's all one pot in the end." Paige glanced at me. I gave her nothing but a calm face. "Of course," she said in the smooth voice professionals use when they smell a complication they would rather not touch. She made a note and moved on. But I saw the small pause in her hand. She was a real estate agent. She knew that a property held in a trust is not a simple thing to sell, no matter what the confident man in the sweater says. She just was not paid to argue with him. When the tour was done, Paige thanked us both and promised evaluation later that week. Warren walked her to the door, charming to the last. Her car pulled away and the house went quiet again. Warren turned to me pleased with himself. "Well, that went smoothly." "It did," I agreed. "Grant will be happy to have a number." "I'm sure he will." He studied me for a moment as if my calm were a puzzle he could not quite fit together. Then he shrugged and went to make a phone call in the study, and I picked up my coat and my keys because I had somewhere to be. Ruth Callahan's office sat on a quiet street near the courthouse. A small brick building with narrow windows and a brass plate by the door. Nothing flashy. I liked that. Flashy lawyers talk too much and listen too little. Ruth met me herself. She was in her 50s, tall, with a firm handshake and the steady eyes of a woman who had watched 100 confident people learn hard lessons in a courtroom. She led me back to her office. It smelled of paper and strong tea. I handed her the thin leather folder. She opened it the way a surgeon opens a tray. Slow, precise, respectful of what might be inside. For several minutes she said nothing. She just turned the pages one at a time while the traffic murmured outside. Finally she leaned back. "Well," she said. I waited. "That explains your husband's confidence." "Does it?" I said. "Yes. Because if all I had seen was the marriage, the years, the shared bills, I might believe the same thing he does." She tapped the top page. "But your father did this properly. This trust is clean. It is old, it is irrevocable, and it was set up by him, not by you, and not during your marriage. The house has never been a marital asset, Hadley. Not for one day." I let out a breath I did not know I had been holding. "And the value it gained," I said, "over the years." Ruth almost smiled. "You already know the answer. You just want to hear a lawyer say it. Say it anyway. The growth belongs to the trust the same as the house. Because the house was never yours personally, the appreciation was never yours personally either. There is nothing there for him to divide. Not the walls, not the land, not the gain." She closed the folder gently. "He can stand in a courtroom and shout about 41 years all he likes. The paper does not care how long he lived there." For a moment I could see the whole road ahead clear and level. "He'll try something," I said. "He always does." "He will," Ruth agreed. Men who walk into a divorce this sure of themselves usually believe they have leverage somewhere. Money or a story or both. She reached for a legal pad. "So we are going to be ready. I want a full timeline. Every major financial decision in your marriage. Purchases, taxes, the accounts. And anything unusual you have noticed lately. Money moving in ways that do not match the life you thought you were living." Something cold and quiet turned over in my chest. "There has been something," I admitted. "In the accounts. I'm still pulling it together." "Pull it together," Ruth said. "Because in a case like this, the house takes care of itself. It is the rest of the estate where a confident man can still do real damage. And where a careful woman can make sure he answers for it." I nodded. I already had my next stop planned. Nathan Brooks had done our taxes for nearly 30 years. His office sat above a bakery that always smelled of cinnamon and warm bread. He was older now, his glasses thicker, but his eyes behind them were still sharp. "Hadley," he said when I stepped in. "This is a surprise. I hope not a bad one." "That depends on the numbers," I said, and I set an envelope on his desk. Inside were copies of statements I had been quietly gathering for weeks. Bank records, card statements, transfers. Nathan put on his glasses and began to read, and the room went silent except for the soft turn of paper and the sound of the bakery below. After a while, he looked up. "Is this about the divorce Warren mentioned?" So Warren had already been talking. Of course he had. "Yes," I said. Nathan leaned back. "He told me the house would probably be sold. Told half the county from what I hear." I'm sure he did. He tapped a line on one of the statements. "These property costs, the taxes, the insurance, the big repairs. Most of them ran through your personal account, not the joint one." "That's right. I remember advising you on that years ago." He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "You listened. Warren never did." "No," I said, "he didn't. Then Nathan turned to a different page and his face changed. He frowned the way a careful man frowns when the numbers stop making sense. "Hadley," he said slowly. "Do you know who this is?" He turned the statement toward me and pointed. There, month after month, was a name I did not recognize. Payments, regular ones, a deposit toward a rental, a car, several charges at stores I would never set foot in. The name on every one of them was the same, C. Renner. I stared at it. My first thought, my only thought, was the woman, the someone else Warren had refused to name, the younger face I had already invented in my mind. So this was her. This was where our shared money had been quietly walking off to month after month while I planted the garden and paid the taxes and kept the house that was never even his. "No," I said. "I don't know who that is, but I was going to find out." Nathan gathered the pages neatly. "If you need documentation of any of this formal copies, I can prepare it. Every transfer. Every date." "That would help," I said. "That would help a great deal." "Warren always assumed he understood the money," Nathan said quietly. "He never once asked whether that was true." I almost smiled. That is a very accurate description of my husband. When I got home, the front room had changed. There were boxes now, 3 of them sitting in the middle of the floor like they belonged there. My boxes. I recognized my winter coats folded on top before I even stepped close. Inside the first one, I found my scarves, 2 of my mother's cookbooks, and the little wooden grinder I used every winter to make spiced cider. Warren had dumped it all together like junk bound for a yard sale. He was standing by the cold fireplace, a phone against his ear. "Yes, Colleen, I know," he was saying. "It's unfortunate. Hadley is taking it all very hard." A pause. "I know she's lived there a long time, but that doesn't change the reality." Another pause, and then lightly, as if he were discussing the weather. "The house will most likely be sold. It's the cleanest way. Better for everyone." Colleen was his niece. She had always treated Warren like a wise older brother instead of the reckless man he sometimes was, and she would repeat this story to half the family before supper. Poor Warren. Difficult wife, reasonable man forced to be firm. He had been polishing that performance for years. I set my keys down. He turned, saw me, and did not even lower his voice. "I have to go," he said into the phone. "She's home." He hung up. He looked at the boxes, then at me as if he expected me to thank him. "I started separating some things," he said, "to make it easier when the time comes." I looked at the box, at my mother's cookbooks tossed on top of my old coats, at 41 years reduced to cardboard. Then I looked at Warren standing in the front room of a house he did not own, packing up the wife of a marriage he did not understand, so certain that the walls around him were already his. And I thought about a name in a bank statement, C. Renner, and a trust my father built before Warren ever knew my name, and a signature somewhere in my files that Warren had scrawled years ago without reading a single line. That night, after Warren went to bed, I sat alone at the table with the thin leather folder open in front of me. I read it again slowly, the way I used to read files at work. And somewhere in the middle of those pages, my hand stopped. There was another document in there, older. I had almost forgotten it was even part of the same folder. It took me back to a bad year, maybe 14 years ago now. Warren had gotten it into his head that he was going to make a fortune. A big commercial deal in Office Plaza 2 towns over brought to him by a man he met at a golf club. Warren wanted to borrow against everything to get in. He wanted to borrow against the house. I told him no. I told him the house was not ours to borrow against. He laughed at me. He said I did not understand how business worked. So I did what a careful woman does. I went to a lawyer quietly, and I had a simple paper drawn up. A short one. It said plainly that the Ashford house and my father's trust were separate, that Warren had no claim on the property or on anything it earned no matter how long we stayed married. Then I put it in front of him at this very table. I remember it clearly. I told him what it was. I told him to read it. I even slid a pen across the wood toward him. He barely glanced at the top line. He signed his name with that big careless swoop of his, the way he signed everything, and he pushed it back and asked what was for dinner. He never read it. He had every chance in the world, and he chose not to. The golf club man vanished 6 months later, along with a good deal of Warren's money. Warren called it a temporary setback. I called it a warning. And I quietly filed that little signed paper away, and I did not think about it again for 14 years. Until now. I ran my thumb along the edge of it. His signature was still there, dark and confident and completely his. Warren believed he was months ahead of me. He had no idea he was already standing on a board he could not see, and that every cruel little box he packed was pushing him one step closer to the edge. The next morning I called the title company back. The same woman answered. She remembered me. And this time, with Nathan's records spread across my kitchen table, I knew exactly what questions to ask. What she told me piece by piece put the last few weeks into a shape I had not fully seen before. About a month before Warren sat me down at that table, he had gone to a lender and tried to open a line of credit against the house. A home equity line. He wanted to borrow a large sum using the Ashford house as the thing that backed it. The lender had done what lenders do. They pulled the title. And the title told them the truth. The same truth Paige Sullivan had stumbled onto with her tablet. The house was not simply Warren's to borrow against. It sat inside a trust. And the trustee, the one person with the authority to sign off on anything touching that property, was me. So the lender had flagged it. And the title company had called me. And I, 3 weeks before I ever heard the word divorce, had told them one quiet thing. Freeze it. No line of credit. No listing. Nothing moves on this property without the trustee, and the trustee says no. I hung up the phone and sat very still in the morning light, because now I understood. Warren had not simply fallen in love and decided to leave. That was the story he told himself, and the story he told Colleen, and the story he would have told anyone who asked. The truth was colder. Warren had tried to take the house first, quietly, before I even knew anything was wrong. He had gone to strip the value out of it while I was still planting tomatoes and thinking I was married. And it had failed. It had died the moment it touched the title, because my father had built a wall around that house 40 years before Warren ever thought to climb it. Warren never knew why the loan fell apart. He probably blamed the bank. He probably called it red tape. He never once imagined that his quiet wife had already reached out one hand and closed the door before he got to it. So he moved to his second plan. If he could not borrow against the house, he would take it in the divorce. That was what the folder was. That was what Grant was for. The announcement at the table, the confidence, the boxes, all of it was Plan B. And he was running it with the same certainty he had run Plan A, never once wondering if the same wall was still standing. It was. It had never moved. And now the small, strange things from those 3 weeks lined up into a single clear row. The man in the gray car who sat across from the house and wrote things down and drove off when I pulled in. He had not been lost. He had been an appraiser sent to put a number on a property Warren was already trying to borrow against. The polite, confused woman from the title company. She had not called by accident. She had called because Warren's quiet little plan had walked straight into my father's wall and set off a bell that only I could hear. I had felt it then, even without the full picture. A wife knows the weather of her own house. I had known something was moving in the dark weeks before Warren ever said a word, and I had done the one thing I knew how to do. I had made sure the door was locked, and then I had waited to see who would try the handle. It was my husband. It had been my husband all along. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt tired and a little sad in the way you feel when a person you once loved finally shows you the full size of what they were willing to do to you. But I did not have time to sit in that feeling for long, because there was still a name I did not understand. C. Renner. I went back to Nathan's copies and I laid them out in order by date the way my father would have. And a picture came together. A deposit on a rental downtown, a nice building. Payments on a car. Charges at restaurants and clothing stores. Month after month, our shared money walking quietly out the door and into a life I knew nothing about. I still thought it was her. The woman Warren would not name. I built her up in my mind again, some younger woman in a nice apartment paid for with our savings. I found the address of the rental in the records. And on a gray Tuesday afternoon, while Warren was off meeting Grant, I drove there. I am not proud of it, but I had spent 41 years being lied to slowly, and I wanted just once to see the truth with my own eyes. The building was new and clean glass and pale brick. I parked across the street. I told myself I would just look. I did not have a plan beyond that. And then the front doors opened and Warren walked out. He was not supposed to be there. He was supposed to be with Grant. But there he was in the good coat I helped him pick out years ago, laughing at something. Relaxed in a way I had not seen him in a long time. Younger, almost. And beside him was a man, not a woman, a man. Young, maybe in his middle 30s, tall, easy in his movements. He said something, and Warren laughed again and put a hand on his shoulder, and the way he did it told me everything I had driven there to learn, and a great deal I had not. I knew him. It took me a moment, and then it came all at once. Cody Renner. I had met him years ago, back when Warren was still working. He had been the young one at the firm, the eager one Warren took under his wing. Warren used to talk about him at dinner. He has a real feel for it, Warren would say. Reminds me of myself. He had mentored the boy, taught him the business. Cody had even come to our house once or twice years ago and sat at my table and eaten the food I cooked and called me Mrs. Merrick. I remembered one of those dinners now all at once, the way you remember a small thing you never thought would matter. It was a summer evening. Warren had invited the young man over to talk shop. I made a roast. Cody was polite and nervous and hungry the way young men are, and he had helped me carry the dishes to the sink, after which most of Warren's guests never did. Warren had watched him across the table the whole night with a kind of pride I took at the time, for the pride of a teacher and a good student. I had cooked for the two of them and never once seen what was sitting right there at my own table. He was 34 years old now, and he was the reason my marriage was ending. I sat in my car and I did not cry. I want to tell you that honestly. I did not cry, not then. I just watched the two of them for a moment longer, and I felt something in my chest go very quiet and very clear. Warren's words came back to me. I've changed. I'm not the man I was. I spent a long time being someone I thought I had to be. I had thought it was the usual speech, the one a man gives when there is a younger woman. But it was not that at all. Warren, at 69 years old, had finally arrived somewhere he had spent his whole life walking away from. And he had chosen to get there by tearing down everything the two of us had built and by trying to take my father's house on the way out the door. I understood him better in that one moment in the car than I had in 4 decades of marriage, and understanding him did not make me hate him. It made me grieve. Not for the man leaving, but for all the years neither of us had ever really known each other at all. Let me stop here for a moment, my friends, because I think about this often. Warren was not a monster. He was a man who waited until 69 to be honest with himself, and then chose the cruelest possible way to do it. If you were sitting in that car watching a stranger you had been married to for 41 years, what would you have felt? Grief, anger, or something quieter that does not even have a name? Tell me in the comments. I always read them. I started my car and I drove home. And on the way, the careful part of my mind, the paralegal part, the part that never fully switches off, did something I am not entirely proud of. It filed the whole thing away, because a marriage may end in grief, but a divorce is settled in evidence. And what I had just seen, all of it, the rental and the car and the restaurants, was not only heartbreak. It was our money, marital money, spent on Cody Renner month after month while the marriage was quietly dying. The law has a word for that. Dissipation. When one spouse takes the shared pot and pours it out on someone else while the marriage falls apart. Courts do not like it. Courts remember it when they decide who gets what. Warren had spent our savings building a new life. He had no idea that every dollar of it was going to come back and sit in a folder on Ruth Callahan's desk. I did not drive to that glass building again. I did not need to. And I want you to understand something about me here because it matters. I never once thought about using what I saw to shame him. I could have. A man his age in a town this size with a story like that. It would have been easy to make him small. I did not want him small. I wanted him honest, and it was too late for that. So I did the only thing that was mine to do. I called Ruth the next morning and I told her plainly what I had found. The rental, the car, the name, who Cody was. She listened without a single sound of surprise the way lawyers do, and when I finished she was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry, Hadley," she said, and she meant it. Then gently, because she was good at her job, she added, "But you understand what this is." "I understand exactly what it is," I said. "It's marital money spent outside the marriage while it was ending. I want it documented, every dollar, dates and amounts, nothing dramatic in court, just the record." "That is the right way to do it," Ruth said. "Quiet facts hurt more than loud ones anyway. Have Nathan send you the copies," I told her. "He's already sorting them. I'll take care of it." I hung up and I felt no joy in it, only the small, steady weight of a thing being done properly. My father would have understood that. A house is not the walls. A house is the paper, and a marriage at the end is not the tears. It is the record of what people actually did. I got home before Warren did. I put the kettle on, and I waited. He came in a few hours later, and to my great surprise, he was carrying a bag of groceries. "I thought I'd cook tonight," he said. In 41 years, Warren had used the stove maybe a dozen times, and half of those ended in burnt eggs. So I said nothing, and I watched him unpack a can of soup and a loaf of bread and set them out like a peace offering. He was heating tomato soup of all things, comfort food. He must have decided that a little nostalgia was a strategy. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Making dinner." He smiled, and it was a smile I did not trust. There's no law against a man cooking in his own kitchen. His kitchen. There it was again. He ladled the soup into 2 bowls and set them on the table, and for a moment the smell of it filled the room, and I could almost remember a younger version of us before any of this. But I did not let myself stay there. "Sit," he said. I sat. He folded his hands like a man about to make a very reasonable case. "I talked to Grant again today," he said. I thought of Warren coming out of that glass building, laughing hand on Cody's shoulder. He had not been with Grant today at all. He was already lying about the small things. The big lie makes the little ones easy. "Did you?" I said. He drew up a settlement, a fair one. He slid a sheet of paper across the table. "You keep your savings, your car. I take the house and the accounts. We sell the place, split what's left after, and we both move on. Clean." I did not touch the paper. "You've thought of everything," I said. "I have. And the house sells, and you split the money, and everyone moves on." "Yes." He leaned back, pleased. "It's the simplest way." I looked at him for a long moment, and then I decided to give him just the smallest push to see how sure he really was. "Warren," I said gently, "did your loan fall through last month?" His face changed. Just a flicker, but I saw it. "What loan?" "The one against the house. The line of credit. Before all this." He went very still. "How do you know about that?" "You should ask yourself why it failed," I said. "You never did you? You just assumed it was the bank." He stared at me. For the first time since he sat me down at this table, the confidence cracked, and something uncertain looked out from behind it. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you should read things before you sign them," I said. "You never have. Not in 41 years. I stood and I carried my bowl to the sink, and I left the settlement lying untouched on the table. Behind me, Warren sat very still, the soup going cold between us, and I could feel him beginning for the very first time to wonder what exactly he had married, and what exactly he had signed, and how much of this house he had ever truly held at all. He still had no idea, but he was starting to. Warren did not sign my quiet little settlement offer, and I did not sign his. So the matter went where these things go when 2 people cannot agree. It went to a courtroom. He was confident right up to the door. In the weeks before the hearing, he kept telling people the house would be sold by spring. Colleen repeated it. Half the family repeated it after her. Poor Warren doing the hard, sensible thing. He never once wondered why his quiet wife was not fighting him harder. He mistook my calm for surrender. It was the last mistake in a long line of them. Colleen even called me once in those weeks. She meant well, I think, in her way. "Aunt Hadley," she said, careful and sweet, "I hope you're not going to make this ugly. Uncle Warren says you've hired some lawyer. He just wants it to be simple. For everyone." "I'm sure he does," I said. "He says the house has to be sold. That's just how these things go." "Is that what he says?" There was a small pause. "It is." "Well," I said gently, "Warren has always been very sure of how things go. Take care of yourself, Colleen." And I hung up because there was nothing to argue about. You cannot argue a person out of a story they have already decided to believe. You can only let the day come when the story meets the paper, and the paper always wins. The courthouse smelled of old paper and floor polish. It had the heavy, patient quiet that a place gets after decades of people walking in sure of themselves and walking out changed. I felt that quiet the moment I stepped through the doors. Warren was already there, standing at the end of the hall beside a tall man in a charcoal suit. Grant Whitaker. They had their heads together, murmuring easy and pleased like 2 men going over a score before a game they expected to win. When Warren saw me, he smiled. Not warmly, just certainly. "You came," he said. "I live here," I said. "It would be strange if I did not fight for it." Grant offered his hand smooth and practiced. "Mrs. Merrick." Ruth stepped up beside me. "Ruth Callahan," she said. "I represent Mrs. Merrick." Grant's smile did not change, but something behind his eyes took a small step back. Lawyers know other lawyers by reputation. Ruth had one. We were called in a few minutes later. The room was smaller than I expected. Dark wood walls, rows of benches, and a tall bench where the judge sat reading a file. Judge Thomas Pierce was an older man with a careful, unhurried face. The face of someone who had listened to a great many confident people and stopped being impressed by confidence a long time ago. We took our seats. Warren sat tall, shoulders square, hands folded, a man attending a ceremony where he expected to be handed a prize. Grant rose first, and he was good. I will give him that. Your Honor, he began. This concerns the division of property after a long marriage, 41 years. For nearly all of that time, my client and Mrs. Merrick lived together in the home in question. My client contributed financially throughout. He paid toward its upkeep. He treated it as the family home because that is what it was. Judge Pierce listened without expression. We are aware, Grant went on, that the property is held in a family trust established by Mrs. Merrick's late father. We do not dispute the trust exists. But a marriage of 41 years cannot simply be erased by an old piece of paper. At a minimum, the growth in the property's value over 4 decades, value built while both parties lived there and maintained, it should be treated as a marital asset and divided fairly. And if it cannot be cleanly divided, the property should be sold and the proceeds shared. It was a smart argument. He had not tried to fight the trust head-on. He had gone for the softer target, the appreciation, the growth, the 40 years of shared life. In another case with another wife, it might have worked. Then Ruth stood. She walked to the front, slowly carrying a thin folder, the same worn leather folder I had handed her weeks before. Your Honor, she said, Mr. Whitaker is right about one thing. The house has been the family home for a very long time. No one disputes that. She set the folder down. But the rest does not hold, and I will show you why in 2 parts. She opened the folder. First, the trust. This property was placed into the Ashford Family Trust by Mrs. Merrick's father, Walter Ashford, many years before this marriage was ever in trouble, and in fact before some of the improvements Mr. Whitaker mentions. It is an irrevocable trust. It was created by a third party, her father, not by either spouse. The house has never once been titled in Mrs. Merrick's own name or in the couple's names. It has always belonged to the trust. Judge Pierce adjusted his glasses and began to read. That matters, Ruth continued, for the point Mr. Whitaker leans on hardest, the growth in value. Because the house was never personal property of either spouse, that growth was never personal property either. It accrued to the trust, to the corpus. It cannot be marital because it was never anyone's to bring into the marriage in the first place. There is no shared pot here for the court to divide. There is only the trust doing exactly what Walter Ashford built it to do. Warren leaned toward Grant and whispered something. Grant did not answer. He was reading his own copy now, his brow lowered. That can't be the whole picture, Warren muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. It was not. But the next part was worse for him. Judge Pierce looked up. Mr. Whitaker, were you aware of the structure of this trust? Grant chose his words with care. We were aware of its existence, Your Honor. We would argue its practical effect is limited by the length of the marriage and the contributions made. Then let me address the contributions directly, Ruth said, and she reached into the folder and drew out a second document older, its edges gone soft with age. This was the moment. I had waited 14 years for it without ever knowing I was waiting. Your Honor, Ruth said, some years ago Mr. Merrick wished to borrow against marital assets to fund a commercial venture of his own. In connection with that, and with full opportunity to read it, he signed this. It is a notarized acknowledgment. In it, Mr. Merrick states plainly in his own signed hand that the Ashford House and the trust are separate property, that he holds no marital interest in the home, and specifically that he holds no claim to any increase in its value, however long the marriage lasts. The room went very still. Ruth carried the paper to the bench. Judge Pierce read it slowly. Then he looked at it a second time. Grant flipped through his files fast, now searching for something that was not there. Because this document had never been in his stack, Warren had forgotten it existed. He had signed it in 10 seconds 14 years ago and asked what was for dinner, and it had sat in a drawer ever since, patient as stone, waiting for exactly this afternoon. Mr. Merrick, the judge said, is this your signature? Warren stared at the page. I watched the color leave his face the way water leaves a sink. I don't remember signing that, he said. But is that your signature? Warren's jaw worked. It looks like it, but I never read. He stopped himself. Too late. Everyone in the room had heard the shape of it. I never read it, he finished quieter. Judge Pierce set the document down. Mr. Merrick, a notarized agreement that you had the opportunity to read and chose to sign is binding whether you read it or not. That is what a signature means. There it was. The whole of Warren's life folded into one sentence from a tired old judge. He had spent 41 years signing things without reading them, sure that the details were beneath a man like him. And the details had been waiting the entire time. Warren turned and looked at me. Not with anger exactly, with something closer to disbelief. "You kept that?" he said. "You signed it," I answered quietly. "I told you to read it. I put the pen in your hand and I told you what it was." He had no answer. There was none. I watched him then, and I saw the whole thing move across his face in order. First the denial, the same denial I had seen the time he backed the car into the mailbox and swore it had not happened while the wood was still falling. Then the anger, quick and hot and useless. And then under both of those, the thing that was hardest to watch. The understanding. The slow, sinking understanding of a man who has just realized that the game he thought he was winning had different rules than the ones he learned, and that the person who knew the real rules had been sitting across the breakfast table from him for 41 years. Beside him, Grant had gone quiet. A good lawyer knows when the ground has shifted, and Grant knew. He stopped flipping through his files. He set them down. When he spoke again, the smooth confidence from the hallway was gone, replaced by the careful voice of a man trying to salvage what he can. "Your Honor," he said, "we would ask for time to review this document." "You may review it," Judge Pierce said, "but it is properly executed and notarized. Review will not change what it says." "My friends, this is the moment I want to ask you about. Warren spent months preparing to take everything I had. And it all came apart because one ordinary evening 14 years ago, he could not be bothered to read a single page. Do you think he brought this on himself? Or do you feel even a little sorry for him? Tell me honestly in the comments." Judge Pierce closed the two documents together. "As to the residence and its value, the court finds it is not part of the marital estate. It is held by the trust and remains there. It is not subject to division, and it will not be sold." Warren sat back slowly as if the chair had moved beneath him. But Ruth was not finished. And this last part was the one I had not planned for at the start, the one life had handed me on a gray Tuesday afternoon in a parked car. "There is one further matter, Your Honor," she said. "The remaining marital estate. The retirement accounts, the vehicles, the joint savings. We ask the court to weigh those in light of the record." She laid out a neat stack of pages. Nathan's work, clean columns, dates and dollars. Over the past year as this marriage was ending, Ruth said Mr. Merrick moved significant marital funds out of the joint accounts and spent them on a third party outside the marriage. A leased condominium, a vehicle, ongoing personal expenses. These are documented in full. This is dissipation of marital assets, and we ask that it be credited to Mrs. Merrick in the division of what remains. She did not say Cody's name. She did not need to. She did not make it lurid or personal or cruel. She let the numbers speak because quiet facts hurt more than loud ones, and Ruth knew it. Grant tried. "Your Honor characterizing ordinary spending. These were not ordinary household expenses, Counselor," the judge said, turning a page. "A separate residence, a separate vehicle. This is quite clearly documented." He looked at Warren over his glasses. "The court takes a dim view of marital funds being spent this way while a marriage is dissolving." Warren said nothing. What was there to say? Every number was true. Judge Pierce squared the papers in front of him. He was quiet for a moment, and then he spoke plainly the way careful men speak when they have made up their minds. "The residence is held by the Ashford Family Trust and is not marital property. It stays with the trust. As to the remaining assets given the documented dissipation, the court will divide them in a manner that credits Mrs. Merrick for the marital funds spent outside the marriage. The specific figures will be finalized in the order." He looked at Warren, not unkindly. "You are free to go, Mr. Merrick." The gavel did not even need to fall. For a long moment, Warren did not move. The man who had walked into my kitchen and announced he was taking everything sat in that courtroom, having taken nothing. Less than nothing. He had come to leave me with a suitcase in a senior apartment near the pharmacy. Instead, he was the one walking out with less than half of what was left, and none of the house, and none of the trust, and none of the 41 years he thought he could carry off in a folder. He gathered his coat. He did not look at me. He walked toward the doors, and for one moment I thought he might stop. Say something. 41 years is a long time to end in silence. But he did not. The doors closed behind him. Ruth packed her folder away. "That went about as well as it could," she said gently. "Yes," I said, "it did." Outside, the afternoon had turned gold. The air was cool and smelled of autumn leaves and someone's chimney smoke. I stood at the top of the courthouse steps for a while and just breathed. I was not celebrating. I want you to understand that. There was no joy in it. A part of my life had ended in that room, 41 years of it, and no piece of paper makes that painless. But I was not bitter either. Mostly I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt light. I felt like a woman who had set down a heavy thing she had been carrying so long she forgot it had weight. I thought about my father then standing on those steps. Walter Ashford with his labeled boxes and his contracts read twice. People had called him dull his whole life, careful to the point of tiresome. He had smiled and let them think it. And here I was, 40 years after he was gone, still standing inside the shelter he had quietly built because he loved his family enough to be boring on their behalf. I understood him completely now. I hoped wherever he was he knew that. Warren had believed the divorce would erase me. He thought he could pack me into 3 cardboard boxes and hand me the smaller half of a life we built and call it fair. He never understood that the one thing he was so sure of the house, the family home my father's house, was the one thing that was never his to take. Because 30 years ago my father built a wall around it out of quiet, careful paper, and 14 years ago a careless man signed his name below a line he would not read. And 3 weeks before any of this began, a woman he had stopped truly seeing picked up a phone and locked a door before he could reach the handle. Warren spent months preparing to take everything. He never once imagined that the quiet woman across the table had understood long before he did exactly what it means to protect the thing that matters most. And sometimes protection looks very quiet, right up until the moment someone tries to take it away. I went home that evening to the house I grew up in. I made a pot of tea in the ugly green kettle Warren always hated. I sat in my father's chair by the window as the light went down. The maple moved in the yard the way it had moved my whole life. The house was quiet, and for the first time in a long time the quiet felt like mine. My dear friends, that is where I will leave Hadley, on those courthouse steps in the gold autumn light, and then home again in a house that held. She protected it long before she ever needed to, and when the day came, it stood. Some of you will say she was wise. Some of you may think she was too careful, too guarded for too many years. I would love to know which. Tell me in the comments. And if this story kept you company today, stay with me, and we will share another one soon.